name is Cesar Rosales. I'm a consultant in technology. I will present my research later, but now I'd like to introduce Mr. Mike Walton from the UNC. He's Director of Digital Engagement. Thank you so much, Mike, and everyone for being here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And let me know if you can hear me okay, or if you can't hear me okay. Really great to hear those presentations. Really interesting to hear all the great work done there. And there's actually quite a few examples in there that would be really useful to talk to you all about a bit more, because very relevant to the work that we're doing. I'm just going to present today a snapshot of our digital strategy. I haven't got too long. If there's time for questions, great. If not, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or have some direct questions. That would be fine with me. So just before we start on the digital strategy, I just want a lot of digital strategies and a lot of digital transformation, when we talk about them, focus on the technology. And we really tried not to do that when we were developing our digital strategy. We tried to look at the impact of the technology, but not spend a lot of time talking about the tools itself, whether it's blockchain or other areas. So that was where we're coming from. And let me just see if I can share this with you. Okay. You see the screen? Great. Okay, so the digital strategy was started about in lockdown. We really wanted to use it as a framework, not a kind of binding set of rules, but a framework for how we could use digital to transform the lives of refugees. Just one example that I always inspires me is Jesse, who was based at the time in Kakuma. They were running a coding camp in Kakuma refugee camp and developing Android applications there for revision applications for the local community. And it kind of just showed to me the power that digital can bring wherever you are. I mean, here, you know, with a generator and a few machines. So you can read Jesse's quote, and you know, I'll share the presentation afterwards, but really the impact of digital on anyone's lives wherever you are is critical. I won't go through this because it's a busy slide, etc., but you'll have it. But this is our strategy on a page. I'll go through the components, but really just to say that we're really trying to cover the whole work of the organization here. For those of you who don't know UNHCR's mandate, we are there to protect those who are forced to flee. So many people are forced to flee for many different reasons. We've seen a huge amount of conflict since 2011, if you look at this graph, has been a very, very steep curve of those who have been forcibly displaced. Some of them have been displaced in their countries. Some of them have had to cross border and find safety. But it has been a very exponential curve, as you can see there. And UNHCR is there to protect those forced to flee and looking at the best ways of doing that. So we developed the digital strategy and we cut it into two parts. And actually, I wasn't going to talk about the more internal facing bit, but it is relevant to some of what I heard or I've heard already. But you know, really the vision for externally facing to the communities that we're working with is to really ensure that the communities we're working with have the skills, agency, and tools to engage in the digital world. Some of you, I think all of you, have access to the digital world. You wouldn't have been able to do those fantastic presentations without that. However, many people don't have that access. And how can we really make sure that we can increase that access and then all of the benefits that can bring? Equally, we're looking a bit more internally, which is how can we transform the way that we work? How can we be more efficient? How can we, if a disaster happens, use data or use tools to be more effective in delivering support for the communities? So imagine you're forced to flee. You're forced to pack up. You're forced to leave your home. You know, you may take one or two things with you, but you don't have a huge amount that you can take with you. One of the first things that people want is to be connected. Why do they want to be connected? They're crossing a border. They want to be in contact with their family. They want to tell people they're safe. And that's one of the first kind of primary reasons why people may want to be connected. But there isn't equitable access to this. There isn't the ability for everybody to be connected. And once you have crossed the border and once you have got somewhere safe, and that's the key thing, is finding somewhere safe, how can you access the information you need to know what steps you can take, what services you can access, and how to start rebuilding your lives. So digital inclusion is pillar one of our strategy, and it's really just about how we can increase access. And the tech envoy mentioned it earlier. It's relevant to all communities, but it's specifically relevant, I think, to the most vulnerable communities too. Just focusing a little bit more on that, once you've got connectivity, you've got how do you kind of start to rebuild your lives? You've left your home, you may be somewhere in an urban environment, you may not have a job. How do you actually start to rebuild your lives? And we're working a lot with partners like Vodafone and other people to provide online access to connected education, which opens up the whole curriculum. But after that, you need to be able to use those skills. And how can you use those skills for future employment? And also, once you've got future employment, how do you make sure you've got somewhere where you can keep your money, and how do you have access to financial services? So all of these things are really important on the journey. And I think you can imagine how we take for granted the access that we have, but actually, not everybody has that same degree of access. However, once you are connected, the risks, that we're all faced with, but they're amplified even more when you're vulnerable. So how can we actually make sure that the right protection measures are in place in order to make sure that people are not made more vulnerable by the access that they have to digital services? So what kind of risks are we talking about? I mean, we have got online fraud scams. We've all seen them. We see them in our own lives. But if you're really relying on other people at the time in your most vulnerable moment, how do you really make sure that you are protected from those risks, and what can we do to avoid those risks going forward? Equally, the use of tech is growing more. All the discussion on AI that we've just heard, biometrics, these are being applied in different situations, whether it's border technologies, or other contexts, registration, etc. How can we make sure that we are using what we would call human rights due diligence, very UN term, but there you go, human rights due diligence, to really make sure that the technology choices that we're using are being done in the most ethical way? And that's a big program of work. Again, love to talk to you all more about how maybe you want to hear more or want to get engaged more. Then we can discuss that further. We've seen, and I'm sure those of you online, you see this in your own lives, but hate speech and misinformation has a huge impact on the forcibly displaced. We've seen that with the Myanmar situation. We've seen that in the Tigray situation. It can actually exacerbate forced displacement. Not only that, can you imagine if you come into a new community, and the community that you're hoping will be welcoming, and then you see also online hate speech in that, and how can you become more part of that community, and how can we really mitigate against these effects? I think it's almost impossible to know how we can address such a large problem, but we have a project going on at the moment to look at how we can address and mitigate the effects of online hate speech and misinformation on the forcibly displaced. We asked about a big subsection of the communities we're working with what they wanted, and they said, actually, we really expect high quality digital services, as we all do from perhaps our governments or our companies that we work with. From us, they expect high quality digital services, and we need to be able to provide those. So it's changed. COVID changed quite a lot as well. But how can we actually move to the next stage of creating a one-stop digital gateway for refugees, where they can actually come in, that we can do registration? So that's particularly important, for example, during the COVID time. And then once you have been registered, how do you access essential services like cash? And how do you go into financial inclusion after that? And then just going back to the engagement and how we communicate and engage on all of these things, we've got a huge number of audiences, and it might be stateless, it might be internally displaced, it might be refugees, but how can we actually communicate more effectively with them? We've got a whole series now. We've built this up. 14 million people access critical protection information on our websites. We've got a bot, not an AI-driven bot, but a bot that's providing information, critical information through WhatsApp and looking at that through other services. Ethically, we've looked at how AI can improve perhaps the delivery of that information, but we haven't found that it's been successful so far, whether it hallucinates content and doesn't give the right answer. And, you know, we've already seen a lot of problematic uses of AI when people have rushed into the use of that technology too quickly, especially with a vulnerable audience. So it's not something that we are using at the moment in that context. Then the other kind of question is trafficking is a huge issue. And people are very, very vulnerable when they have crossed the borders. And one of the questions we had in Ukraine was, how can we communicate the risk of gender-based violence to individuals? How can we use new technologies? Is it ethical? Again, I'm just throwing this in there for your kind of thinking about different ethical dilemmas. Is it ethical to use online marketing techniques, whether it's Facebook ads or Google search or anything like this, to get critical protection information to those who are crossing the border? Something that we've kind of discussed a lot, and be interested to get your perspective on that. We're really looking at also the key principles of how we deliver this. So we're looking at accessibility. We want to ensure we've got full accessibility for those with disabilities across everything and all the services we're offering. We really don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to look out there and we want to see the different things that are being used and how we can actually maximize the potential. So again, really interested to hear from you about use cases you might have seen in other contexts, which you think might be relevant to our context. We know that technology uses a lot of energy in different contexts. How can we're also seeing this link between climate, conflict, and displacement. How can we make sure that our digital strategy isn't actually adding to that problem by, you know, using vast amounts of energy in the use of AI or blockchain or other elements? How can we do that in the most ethical way? And yeah, how can we really just make sure that we're involving not just the vulnerable population that we're working with, but the sections of those populations that are even more vulnerable, whether it's you know, aged population or other populations that perhaps won't have the same ability to access the digital services that we're talking about. This is not about less face-to-face time and moving to a digital world of humanitarian assistance. This is about complementing what we do and making sure that we can spend more time delivering quality services by making our work more efficient. So I think I'm going to stop there, nearly on the 15-minute mark. There's a couple of minutes left if there are any questions. But again, you can see that the way that digital crosscuts, I took the last one out, but I kind of wish I'd left it in there, which was about the working digitally pillar, because that is really just looking at how do we use digital in our working environment. And there was one example of using Internet of Things to monitor water quality delivery in a certain area, and that making us much more efficient in the way that we could not have to do journeys to check levels and to check delivery status. So working digitally is equally a kind of key part of the strategy. So 5 pillars: inclusion, digital services, digital protection, digitally engaging with our communities, and working more effectively digitally. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Mike.